All right, we live.
All right. Peace to the family. Many of you know my name is Brother Reggie Mabry. I am so happy to be a guest of yours today on dealing with a very, very important project or presentation, something that's in the community. So the big title is going to be really the death of the connotations on the Tmhw. Uh, we've heard this concept of the Tmhw uh, on YouTube at least for 6 years, but it's been going on for at least 20 years. And, I didn't really have a reason to really right it wrong. But it's we're having a very very important debate, and this debate is about information. It's not we as Garfield Reed and Jabari Osase, and part of this debate is really what's right and what's wrong, what can be sourced, what can be cited, what's real, what's unreal, what's plagiarism, and it's based on time periods. And we have a habit in this community, and I'll explain it again, but we have a habit in this community where, well, lately, and sometimes where we think spiritual leaders have some connection to history. And so if a spiritual leader says something, no matter what you say, right? You have to listen to the spiritual leader. No, that happens in the churches, the synagogues, the mosque, the temples. If the spiritual leader says something, you have to take that above everything else. And even if you research something different, your soul depends on what your spiritual leader says. Well, we're finding out that that is not true. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen if I can, and I am going to go into a presentation that is actually going to look closely at this word Tamehu. Okay, so let's share my screen. Share screen. Great. Well, in a recent conversation on Sonetta Studios, Black News 102, shout out to Brother Sonetta, I had a conversation with Jabari Osase, Mr. Osase, and he obviously heard or seen my presentation on the Tmhw, and we're going to get into that. And he did something. I asked him on this show, well, what is your reference for the Tmhw? Now, for years, people have been using Dr. Gerald Massey's, and we're going to get into that. But he tried to find a way to get out by saying Dr. Sheka Anta Diop. Now, this debate that's coming up with Brother Garfield Reed and Jabari Osase, Mr. Asase, well, recently it seems that he switched this December 25th stuff. Uh, and that gives us an indication that he is willing to switch his thinking in the last moments. But unfortunately, just switching it won't survive. Just like um, referencing Dr. Shekanta Diop won't survive. And so let's just get into this. So the Kemet centrist viewpoint on the Tmhw is pseudo. It's wrong, pseudo, and it can be plagiarized because up until this particular point, we did not have a reference of where Mr. Asaze got or used the connotations of the Tmhw. We didn't have it. And so he gave us Dr. Shekanta Diop. Now, we are going to examine some things. So, um, Mr. Morpheus is a very, very, very um, good researcher. He speaks the Arabic language. He knows the Quran. He knows the Hadiths. And he knows better than me how to sometimes get to the point. Another person who does that and gets to the point real quick is Aunt West, Bobby Paramaniac, and also Jonathan Owens. And you will see in this debate how quickly Garfield Reed gets to the point. Now, Brother Sinetta, my brother Sinetta, well, he's a debate promoter, um, and he is definitely should be respected. But be careful about taking Sinetta's point of view on matters of history, uh, unless he sources or cites it himself. So oftentimes he tries to put on a good show, and he puts on a good show. And so sometimes I got to laugh. But Mr. Morpheus gave me a metaphor that I am going to use as I often talk to him about history, that I'm going to explain the Tmhw. Well, history is like a bus terminal where buses, which are books, leave the station with drivers, authors. So these buses are books, and all of these topics are in the bus terminal. Passengers get on and off at stops. Those passengers are researchers, regurgitators, and pseudos, students, and others. In the case of the Tamehu and Dr. Shekanta Diop, the researchers, regurgitators, and pseudos got on his bus, and the one that is talking about the Tmhw in this community, because nobody else is really talking about the Tmhw, he got off the bus on the first stop, and the bus kept moving through history. So Dr. Shekanta Diop's understanding of the Tmhw changed through the years until the last years of his death. This presentation will debunk the version of the regurgitators who got off on the first Tmhw stop. Now, we must understand that Dr. Shekanta Diop is a researcher himself. Not unlike us, but over the years, Dr. Shekanta Diop became a master researcher. But he does what we all do. We look for sources and to read, to understand, to study, and to use in our publications. The sources that Dr. Shekanta Diop used changed throughout the time period, and Dr. Shekanta Diop changed with those sources. Not unlike Dr. John Henry Clark, not unlike Dr. Joseph Benjo Cannon, not unlike many of our great researchers. Sometimes they completely let you know when they changed, or sometimes, while you're on the bus with the driver, you find out. So let me show you an example. Now, uh, on page 97 of The African Origin of Civilization, Shekanta Diop analyzed Morit's statement on the Libyans. So you can read page 97 of Diop, 96 and 97 of African Origin of Civilization. Then Dr. Shekanta Diop, he makes this statement. I'm going to read it quickly. The statement sums up everything concrete and tangible known about the Libyans. History teaches that they were half starved pilferers living on the periphery of Egypt in the western part of the Delta, that they served as mercenaries, that they settled in the Delta during the low period, that they were whites, with the exception of the Tmhw, and basically refractory to civilizations at a time when the Black world was already civilized. This is what historical documents teach us about the Libyans, along with their geographical distribution on the northern coast of Africa and reported it by Herodotus. We may well wonder what sort of fabrication led to attributing to such people different in every aspect from the Egyptians, the origin of Egyptian civilization. As a crowning contradiction, they have even been presented as the Egyptian so called savage or less cultured cousins. These Libyans were to come to the Delta as mercenaries during the low periods and receive plots of land from the Pharaoh Egypt. We may well wonder what sort of fabrication led to attributing such peoples different in every respect from the Egyptians. The origin of Egyptian civilization as a crown of contradiction that have even been presented as the Egyptian so-called savage or less cultured cousin. These Libyans were to come to the Delta as mercenaries during the low periods and receive plots of lands from the Pharaoh Egypt. Well, that was 19 uh, I don't know, Dr. Diop wrote The African Origin of Civilization sometime in the 50s to 60s or something like that. And he sourced what other scholars sourced at the time. And he's even now even questioning some of those concepts of the Tmhw being the uh, cousins of the ancient Egyptians. And he's questioning here the so-called savage or less cultural cousins, because you know what? He's still driving on the bus, and when you know you're driving and you're looking at different towns and cities, and you have different thoughts. But this is what he wrote in 1997. But the Kemet centrists seem to hang their uh, hats on these things. All right, not thinking about Dr. Diop. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't finish. Would be saturated with foreigners. From the intermingling comes the relatively lighter complexion of the Copts. Thus, the Delta never really mattered in Egyptian history until the Low Period. If Egypt was never a maritime power that can perhaps by explained by the fact that a civilization was born in the interior of the continent, contrary to that of other peoples on the periphery of the Mediterranean. According to Plutarch and Isis and Osiris, the Egyptians considered the sea as a tainted secretion. This conception is incompatible with the notion of a riparian origin. Oh, well, let me read that last part. This conception is incompatible with the notion of a riparian origin. I don't know. We may have some riparians in the house, but this is Diop speaking. Now, Diop's own research of sources will change dramatically over the years to his final statement in Libya Antique. My analysis is in the statement of Diop. He was responding to information from Moret, but we all know that further information will come out about the Green Sahara years later after Cheikh Anta Diop's death. And from ancient Egyptian artifacts and translations in later years, sorry for the spelling, we will explore Diop's changing views, and this will show that any negative statements of the Tmhw will have to disappear, and the YouTubers or comedics with negative views on the Tmhw are based on their lack of updating their information on who's a source. At the same time, in this period of time, Europeans were still looking to put themselves in ancient history and controlling the artifacts. Black scholars such as Diop, Ben Jochannan could only base their thoughts on materials they could get. However, today, no African should dismiss Africa's fourth important civilization in light of current information. Nahisi, uh, the Nubian, the ancient people of Tawi, which is Egypt, and the Tmhw, the southern and northern components. So there I am basing my arguments on what we know 2022, not what we know when we first read Diop's African Origin of Civilization when it was translated into English. And then in 86, when the African Origin of Civilization was translated by Yalingi Ngemi uh, and worked on that project with Dr. John Henry Clark, Professor Leonard Jeffries, and myself. I was part of the project of the English translation of Civilization or Barbarism. Now, Diop's analysis of the Libyans in African Origin of Civilization, uh, yeah, on page 66, he says he looks at the groups, the Remesh, the Tamu, the Nahisi, and the Chinu, and he says he says the Egyptians seen by himself, the black type A, the Indo-European, he calls the Tamu, the European, C, other blacks of Africa, D, the Checheno, the Semite. Uh, and he gets this from Lepsius, and he sources at least a figure. All right. So this is what Diop is citing, what someone else cited. Well, then it says this painting from the tomb of Ramesses III shows that the Egyptians perceived themselves as blacks and represented themselves as such without possible confusion with the Indo-Europeans or the Semites. This is a representation of the races in minute detail, which guarantees the realism of the colors. Throughout the entire history, the Egyptians never dreamed of representing themselves by types B or D. Well, the ancient Egyptians have represented themselves in many depictions, and some of them are lighted peoples, and we could tell that they're mixed people. The question will remain, is the figures in B an African? Diop says Indo-European based on his sources, but the Egyptians label him, but the Egyptians will label him as a Tmhw. No modern scholar, white or black, should do a pure skin color analysis of Africans. That is just dumb. We do not know if the depictions were based on particular kings or chiefs, that they may not represent all the people, especially when we know that the Tamu are Africans of Nubia's beginning in the south. And we're going to find that out. And mixed with other populations of the north. Therefore, in modern research, any anti-Tamu notations are based only on the ancient Tawi account. What I'm trying to say is that the ancient Egyptians were or the people of Tawi themselves were Egypt centric. They cared about their civilization, and everyone else was less than they were. Right? When in context, if we read it correctly, in context of disputes and wars, their borders, their people, their cattle, their system, right? And later in ancient Egyptian civilization, thanks to Ankh West, Bobby Banga, right? Smash Rockwell, right? And people like Garfield Reed putting these concepts on his show, and Sonetta introducing us to a platform in which we can talk, we find out uh, that information changes, information should be dissected, right? Uh, that's what we learned today. We also learned that Kemet, ancient Kemet, was centrist, and we see the Kemetic groups of people acting like they are Egyptians 5,000 years ago, also being Kemet centrist, applying terms to people who do not exist in the modern era. So calling European scholars the Tmhw and calling invaders into Africa the Tmhw based on a 5,000-year-old thinking of the ancient Egyptians, right? It's just dumb. It's just dumb. So Diop, in his last years of his life, changed his view on the Libu and Tamu, or the Chinu, right? He says in Libya Antique, the earliest stratum of the Libyan population was a black population from South Sahara, as it is being confirmed by archaeology. This region was referred to as Chehenu or Libo in pharaonic texts. These two roots are evident in present-day Senegalese languages such as Wolof. The population of Cape Verde, that is the Dakar region, still forms of the Libo ethnic group, which would include the Tamu. which includes the Libel subgroup, the Bop, or white Libel, an expression that refers back to the period preceding the Libel migration. Meanwhile, the Libyans in the western region of the Delta were building up a third Libyan coalition, which was to be the fifth against Ramses III. They were defeated by him in 1188 before Memphis. Henceforward, the Libyans were never again to rise in Egypt. They infiltrated Egypt peacefully and even served in its army as auxiliary corps. Wow, that's a lot. Dr. Shekante Diop, after African origin of civilization, after civilization or barbarism, comes back to the Libo populations and said that they were a black population from the South Sahara. He also goes further to say that these roots find themselves in Senegalese languages such as Wolof. My God. The Tmhw are Africans that spread from the west of Egypt into West Africa. The, the Tamehu are not white people, you Kemetic centrist, you people who got off the bus on the first stop. The person that you said you got the reference from shows that you got off the bus on the first stop when Dr. Shekante Diop and other scholars kept driving. So we're finding that the conscious community is flooded with poor scholarship. People trying to make a name for themselves. People trying to say things like hieratic is different than the Medu Necher, where we can't find really a word for the hieratic in itself. It's not important because the hieratic, the demotic, is the Medu Necher. Now, in my next video that I'm going to do, Mr. Osaze laughed at me and he says, I'm not a priest of the Medu Necher. You're right, Reggie. I never said I'm a priest of the Medu Necher. Well, what is the Medu Necher? The Medu Necher is the sacred words, the words of the Necher, the words of the divine, the words of God. If you're not a priest of the Medu Necher, and I'm going to do a whole video on this, then what kind of priest are you? Because you said that you're not a priest of the Medu Necher, so maybe you don't know what the Medu Necher is. Maybe you just think it's a language, but it's not only a language written, spoken, it's the concept that should give people who practice ancient Egyptian, Tawi, Kemetic faith a connection to the concepts of the divine and the principles of the ancient Egyptians. So you're right. You're not a priest of the Medu Necher. You said it yourself, and you're not. So we'll come back to that in another video that I'm going to make. Maybe I'll make it on my own channel. I have a channel called Africa Online TV. Please subscribe. If any of the mods are here, look up Africa Online TV. Please subscribe. Also, I am I'm a public intellectual. If you choose to do so, please donate to my Cash App. Right? Now, let me just continue. In Diop's last years of his life, he also said this. Such were the different tribes. Let me see if I can move this here. Yeah. Such were the different tribes in ancient times that they were gradually to organize themselves into kingdoms throughout northern Africa. The kingdom of Mauritania in the northwest corner of the continent after the conquest of the Gutalans, and the kingdom of Numidia, which flourished in the time of Massamima, which stopped at Tripoli, and eastern Libya, in which the Greek colony of Cyrene lived in an enclave founded in the 7th century, 630, by the inhabitants of the Terror Island in the Cyclades, following a long drought that led to a food shortage. For other colonies were added to this one to form what it was called Pentapolis, or 5 cities. Dr. Sheka Ante Diop goes further with these Libo groups or Nubian Libo groups, right? Because we have to maintain where they come from. That Sheka Ante Diop still driving the bus while the other people got off the bus thinking that they have something important, says that these people became uh, the kingdom of Numidia, right? So Morocco and Libya and all of these were inhabited by the Tmhw. That is why I'm calling the Tmhw or the Tmhw, right? Africa's uh, fourth important civilization, great civilization, right? Africa's, and that they spread to the west. If you were a Nubian, if you were a person of Tawi, of the two lands, you could not get to any of these areas without traveling the Western Desert, and the Western Desert was the home of the Tmhw. They are the ones who created the trade routes because Egypt, Tawi, Kemet, Henu, right? Tameri was isolate. It was these groups of Africans that spread. The Tmhw is a great African civilization, and I can call it a civilization because they had writing. And that writing that they had would be the basis of the Berber languages. So somebody has been lying to you. Okay, let me just continue. Well, Clyde Winters, a lot of people say a lot of things about Dr. Clyde Winters, but this is the statement that he made. So there are other scholars, many white and black, Asian, Arab, and others who are honest scholars, and they're reclassifying the Tmhw and the Tmhw. The inhabitants of Libya were called the Tmhw. This is not my statement. It's Clyde Winters, Dr. Clyde Winters. The Tmhws. The Tmhws were organized in two groups: the Tmhw in the north, and the Nahisi in the south. He's quoting from what I talked about in Diop. A Tmhw personage is depicted on Amerindian period pottery. So he's saying that the different groups, Nakata 1, Nakata 2, Nakata 3, right? Amerindian pottery. Some Tamehu wore a pointy beard, phallic sheath, and feathers to their heads. But if you look at the second figure in the Table of Nations, you will notice that his dress is Middle Eastern. He represents ancestors of the Arabs. No way can he be associated with the C group peoples, which include the Proto-Davidians, Mande speakers, Pulani, etc. This is what Clyde Winters is saying. Because people are still driving the bus out of the terminal. We can't say what a person says as fact. We can listen to what they say. The Tmhws are also called the C group people by archaeologists. The Central Peasant was a Central C group settlement discussed in detail presence of the C group culture traits in the Central Peasant along with their cattle during the middle of the 3rd millennium BC. The inhabitants of Libya was called the Tmhws. The Tmhws were organized in two groups, the Tmhw in the north and the south. Okay, so somehow I recopied part of that. And then he gives this reference. Um, so, um, uh, so he is saying that you will notice the dress is Middle Eastern. He represents an ancestor of the Arabs. No way can he be associated with the C group peoples, which included the Proto-Davians, Mande speakers, etc. But then he says the Tmhws are called the C group people. It's Dr. Walter Clyde Winters. So, um, so he gives more of his concepts. My point of this, and you can read it on your own, so I could save time. Nothing that you hear from a driver on the bus should you take as the word of God. You should follow their sources and do researches because they get all their information from the terminal. They get dispatched, and then they get on their bus and they start driving these authors, and they come up with concepts, and it's up to researchers to continue the research. Oh, this is interesting. Sometimes ancient Egyptians have a play on words, and I just wanted to bring this up. So this is Amos Tmhw is shown with another royal lady. Now, I am not saying Tmhw actually means Tamehu, but I know the ancient Egyptians play on words. So I just want to add this that the Mehu is lower Egypt, the north. And the Tamhu, or considered in most material as Libyans. And and then there's the Tmhw, right? The Tmhw, and this is the other way to write Tamu. And it is, but one thing that we can be clear of is that Amos Henetamehu was the daughter of second Rene the Tau and his sister wife Amos. Her titles include king's wife, Nisu, great king, etc. Right? King's daughter, right? She's and so my point of this is that Amos Henetua Tamu is a royal ancestor of the 18th and 19th dynasty. So, and she is from the north. Her family saves Egypt and brings the great 18th dynasty. Something is wrong with the Kemetic centric teachers and priests not understanding that they are pointing to the north as the Tamehu, and that there are groups of people in the north, and some of them could be and most probably would be the early Libo people, and the ancient Egyptians are marrying them because they are Africans. The Tamehu people called the in Lower Egypt or Africans and others that come in. But here's your second Enre Tawe, the second, right, who you've made, who is important in African history and was very important to the Nile Valley Africans. Uh, his family is named Tameho because it's giving Hanet. Hanet is like wife from Tameho. Okay, that's just how they talk. All right. So my point of it is sometimes you get Kemet centrists and you lose fact that these are African people and not. Now, Kemetic people are not immune from being called pseudo or wrong. They get no special treatment. If they're wrong, then their spiritual superpowers go in the trash can. My point is, you have no connection. If you say you have spiritual powers, then when you are wrong in history, how does that work? How does that work? Well, you can have spiritual superpowers and be wrong in scholarship at the same time, unless we should depend on our research. Instead of people having some special connection to secret inner wisdom that the rest of us can't obtain. I would rather rely on research. Chemicentrists' view of the Tmhw damages the African story. Chemicentrists who have not investigated Tamehu properly, for if they did, they would see the positive relationships with the ancient Egyptians and the Tamehu. He would also see the more positive relationships of the Nubian and the Tamehu. He would also see the importance of the Nubian Tamehu, the southerners of the Libo Tamehu, then northerners, their Tamehu. They had two lands, like the ancient Egyptians. They had a northern component and a southern component, and they lived on the what they call the corners of heaven. Heaven being ancient Egypt, and they lived on the outskirts. More important, the Tamu with their neighbors controlled western desert regions, and they were migratory people intermixing with other Africans. You saw Diop said that. While the ancient Egyptians remained in the Nile Valley. Said another way, they were participants and establishments of the trade routes. If there were migrations out of Egypt, then it was with the Tammuz help. For they controlled, with their Nubian neighbors, the southern route of the Wadi Hawar, the Abu Balas Trail, etc., etc. There are many other factors to unpack with the Tamu, which includes their linguistic affinities to neighboring Africans, that complete cultural affinities, uh, uh, and their complete cultural affinities and interactions to other African neighbors. Their descendant populations, the Libyan pharaohs, the Gramatis, the Berbers, the Numidians, the Afri people in the north, and their southern Nubian relationships. At another date, I will unpack Dr. Salim Faraji's paper on the tumuli, and I might be able to show some of UNESCO's work of Libya Antique, which Dr. Shekant Diab wrote his last chapter in the last years of his life. So, Mr. Of the Kim, I'm not going to say, I'm going to say the Kemet centrists and their priests seem that the Tamu is only light-skinned culture that ancient Egyptian contested with. This is not the case. This is a poor scholarship, and demonizing the Tamu without researching stops us from understanding Africa. Now, let me just be clear. Infedici Jehudimas is a Kemetic scientific priest. That's what he calls himself. He's not included in this. He doesn't say this. They have another term for invaders in Africa. Osoin Ka does not say this. I've never heard the Shrine of Anu say this. The only shrine that I've heard say this is the shrine that Jabari Asase is the head of. No other groups of people is saying this. I'm going to check when I can if there are any other groups that say this, but this is his own thinking. And it's failing miserably. Now, for years I've heard negative descriptions of the Tamil, and I believe that the Kemetic centrists are now trying to hide behind getting off the bus early of the with the driver Diop. However, I think they transferred and they actually got on the bus of Massey. So I think they got off of Diop's bus. They weren't at their particular destination, and they got on another bus driver, and this bus driver was Massey. Now, just to be short, I say a lot, and you could read it on my Africa Online, right? But Chuck Morgan handled this issue many years ago of what Gerald Massey said. And he was dealing with his own former culture, which was the Nubians. And Dr. York and many people of that time period was talking about the Tmhw. And Chuck Morgan, shout out to brother Chuck Morgan. He sourced for us this from many years ago, looking at what Massey said. The Egyptians identified themselves on the monuments as the Rut. A pictorial representation is found in the tomb of Seti I of the four races of people arranged in groups of four men each. These are the Nasi Negroes, the Hemo, men of light brown who with blue eyes and hair in a bag, the Tamahu are who are fair as Europeans, and the Rut who are Egyptians. Now I'm gonna stop right there. Anybody who reads the Medu Neter knows that there is a problem. There's no group of people called the Rut. He's talking about the Remet. There's no group of people called the Nasi. He's talking about the Nahesi, right? The Tamahu, who are fair as Europeans, and the Rut, who are the Egyptians. These are typical groups not merely meant for conquered races, as may be gathered from the signification of their names. So, how does their names say conquered races unless he's looking at the Nasi, the Nahesi as the Negroes, conquered races? Hmm, interesting. The Tamahu are light complexioned people. In Egyptian, Tama means people. Wow, I thought it was Remet. And created. I thought Tem might be a word of created. Who is white in ivory? I thought it was Hajet. The Tamahu are created white people. Na is black ink. Ne is black bird. So is the person of birth. The Nasu, one black born, or in Egyptian phase, black from the egg, Su. Him is the rudder to paddle fish. Hemi to steer. The Hemos thus indicated are the sailors, sea farmers, the people of the Isles. The Isles of the Gentiles, Gen X, might be rendered in Egyptian by the Isles of Amu or Hemu. The hieroglyphic hem is the sign of a water frontier. Hmm. Well, Gerald Massey is demonizing the Tmhw. A particular Kemetic shrine is demonizing the Tmhw. Geop, based on what was out there, may have used as a source like Moret and made an analysis of what Moret was saying, but Shekant Diop kept driving. Now, the Kemetic centrist people have a problem. The Kemetic centrist people have a problem to explain why they are using Diop's first work when Diop himself said later, cleaned it all up. Where is this? Why is this not going up? Where did Diop said? Here. The earliest stratum of the Libyan population was a black population from the South Sahara, as being confirmed by archaeology. This region was referred to as the Tmhw or Libo in Pharaonic times. These two roots are evident in present-day Senegalese languages such as Wolof. Uh, People have been spitting on the Tmhw, but history might say that West Africans and Northwest Africans have some more relationships with the Tmhw than they do with the ancient Egyptians. Let's just show a map. Oh, well. The hieroglyphic map, this is from Wikipedia. So they give Tamehu, which I talked about in the north on this side of Egypt, the eastern, roughly the eastern desert, the desert, the deseret, right? The redlands, and the redlands over here. And here's they put a picture of the Tmhw. And the Tmhw's territory is in the western desert. Next to Nubia, right? Next to Egypt, and more importantly, next to some of the most sacred places in Egypt. Abju, shout out to Abju, where, right? Sut, right? This is here somewhere. This is here. So we know this area. The Tmhw were of a Nubian group of people. Here you see him with a side lock, and we're going to talk about him a little bit more. Because you can't just take one picture and then you do what do you call it? Picture ship, right? We can't do that. So over here is another picture of the Tamehu from another uh, 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 another time period, and the Tamehu has the two feathers on their hair. They have beards, but there were Africans. Honoris Herod. I'm talking about the ancient Herod. Shout out to Sean Herod, but he takes his name from Honoris Herod, and he was a hunter. He was a hunter. Herod. He had a beard. Look it up. Honoris Herod. Look at his pictures. Now we see his name over here, Tmhw. These are the Tmhw. And guess what, family? Not only is ancient Egypt writing, the Tmhw are writing. They have scarifications on their bodies in their Libo Nubian language that will become the Berber language. And you will see that this symbol right here seems like to be a Shimshu or follower. So I said, I suggest that you read Manu Ampin's blog on YouTube as he discusses the uh, the four races. You should go and read and listen to Smash Rockwell's show on YouTube. Shout out to Smash Rockwell again. Racism in Egyptology, right? So I want to ask you a question, y'all. Who's been lying to you? Maybe not lying. That's a strong word. Whose information was not well founded? Who got off the bus at the first stop? Now, I'm going to continue. I got just a few more slides, and then I want to talk about a few other things related to this. Okay, so the Tamu, two feathers, have a beard, have a side lock, have writing. Here's the Tamu, and this just kills it. So the Tamu is the Libyans, right? Libyans is a modern word, right? The ancient words are actually better. Temet is a goddess in the Red Land. Uh-huh. Right? Okay. Tmhw, right, is a place of the Tamu. Funny, the Tamu has a feather in their head, and the ancient Egyptians write it with the goddess Ma'at. Let me just see this again. Tmh throw stick, Tamu, right? Th throw stick with the M over here, Tamu, the land, the feather of my aunt. Maybe, oh, Tamu over here is a Libyan god. Maybe that the Tamu, the Nubians, the ancient Egyptians are more closely related than we thought. Maybe the Tamu, who are in the Western Desert, who are next to Beer Kasiba, not the Playa, and other sacred places, maybe these are all the children of the parent people of the civilizations before them, and they are just the children having the same culture, expressing it different ways. You see where this is problematic when you're Egypt centric? Nobody should be Kemetic centrist. What about Nubia? What about uh, uh, Ta Pajet or Ta Seti, right? What about that? What about the Tmhw in the Tmhw in western and eastern deserts? What about their relationships across North Africa to the Afri people, the Berber people in the east, and the Numidians? What if it was the Tmhw, and most likely it was a Tmhw that secured these routes? The Tmhw had writing. The Tmhw has attributes of the ancient Egyptians because they all come from the parent people. The Tmhw has feathers. To get a feather means you got to fight an ostrich, right? Ostriches ran the Green Sahara. Maybe these are concepts from a much older people. Nothing that I have said is outside of what we have just read. Oh, this is interesting. I just have a puzzle on my face. Y'all should be looking at me. So when we went to the Genesis Museum, remember I did a lecture in the Genesis Museum and I read the Meta Nature. Remember that? Uh, and in the Genesis Museum, in a section that I wasn't able to get to because InfoDC was holding a class there is a picture of Amhai. Ah, well, it's funny. She is of a light complexion. She's in a part Tmhw. Here she is being represented as a Tamehu, the two feathers. Yes, yes. Oh, let me just do this again. Because we know that Africans of the Nile, of, of the West and of the East, intermingled with other Africans. Africans have different complexions. We have the most diversity. I've already showed you Maad, and I've also showed you that the Tmhw, right, is featured with the feather of Maad. Something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong. I think. Let me just continue because I want to. Okay, I don't want to read this whole article. You can go and read it yourself. You could go on my site where I talk about it a little bit more. But there was a ceremony of the returning eye of Hathor or Hut, but you know it's a Hathor, many of you. And in this ceremony, the Nubians were invited. The Tamehu was invited. The Tmhw was invited. Along the Puntites were invited. The Amel was not invited. Right? Um. Ah. Part of this thing says in the letter to Pepe II to Harkuf, the king refers to a region where Harkuf obtained a pygmy as the Ta Ayatawa, land of the horizon dwellers. Like the corners of heaven, such a geographical place is rarely outside overtly religious literature. Well, guess what? The region of the Tmhw is a corner of heaven, land of the horizon dwellers, outside of what they call the horizon. The the dung, which is called the pygmy, right, was obtained in the western area, probably where the forest part was, that it wasn't. So it says the speech of his letters was noted, which you composed of the king and the palace in order to erase that you may not have descended a place in peace with Yam, with the army. Yam is in Nubia or Tapajet, Taseti, Yam, with the area which was with you. You say in a letter of yours that you bought every great and good produce. You said in this letter of yours that you had bought a dancing dinge, pygmy, of the god from the land of the horizon dwellers. See, this region was Pan African. They didn't have the connotations that modern people are putting on when they got off the bus on the first stop. And they're polluting our community with calling Europeans, like, for example, Dr. Richard Carrier, a Tmhw, and others. He's not a Tmhw. He's a Tmhw if you got off the first bus. But if you continue to ride, you know that Dr. Richard Carrier is of European American descent, right? He is not an African. But you spit on Africa to make some point of foreigners. Now, we would complain if Europeans called us names 4 or 5 thousand years ago, like the Syrians called Taharka. We would be upset. That is symbolic racism, or we can't be racist, so because we don't have no power. But that's symbolic, uh, uh, pejorative, ethnic thinking. No scholar should do that. Nobody calling themselves a scholar, and especially when they are wrong. So let's just continue. Okay, so let's just see if I could say who the groups of people were in this particular. Here I'm just defining the ceremony. So Hawat, as she turns into the eye, right? She's in Nubia, and she's coming back to Kemet or Tawi. And there's a festival of all groups of people, of African people, in this ceremony that continued. Let me see. And describes a festival well suited to the context of celebration of the new year that reverse world appropriate to the return of the goddess, her marriage and the birth of her son, and the swampy landscape. The imagery of the hymn is that of the far southeast area of the dawn. Well, the far southeast area of the dawn is also on the corners of heaven. So the groups of people related to this story were invited. And sometimes we call them the Libo Nubians, the people of Pun. But you can read the article yourself. There you go. Now, I said many of this stuff. I don't know if I want to do this, but I will say I will mention this because I wanted to mention this and give Brother Garfield and Rob Bourne just a heads up. So there are lots of stories of people moving back and forth from the Nile to cross the Red Sea and into West Africa, and this is one of those stories by a scholar, Bube Gadu, who was featured in the same publication of Libya Antique with Sheka Anta Diop. And they talk about um, an African living in Egypt, going to Yemen, and then being part of the founding the Sanika Empire of the Wagadu, right? So I just want to give them a heads up so they can read it. Nothing again. When you're on a bus with a driver, you take it as your Bible. Don't get off on the first stop. But I wanted to bring this up because there are stories of Africans migrating in a later period between areas. And Brother Sekou, if Brother Sekou tries to use this, first he has to source me. He has to source the author, me for finding it, the author himself, and Sekou gets no credit, right? I'm not on Sekou's side. I've seen what he's done. I've seen his character. This is research of mine. I would not help him against, but he gets no credit because he didn't bring it up in his first conversation. He brought up some other source where Brother Garfield and Rob Bourne smell something really bad. about it. So these are people who are getting on the buses and getting off on the first stop, coming into our communities as if we don't do research, and then getting mad at us because we don't check them. So now, what I am going to do is I'm going to show you. I'm gonna go through. I'm going to go through a source real quick. Um, yeah. Okay. So let's just go through this source. Bookmarks. Bookmarks. Mobile bookmarks. Uh, yeah. Bookmark manager. Sorry, you don't see.
Hey, Reggie, what happened? Reggie left? All right, so in the meantime, if Reggie's coming back, I didn't catch the last part of what he just said. My brother Ricardo Robinson said, I don't trust none of these so-called Egyptian scholars. They're some of the most mendacious people. I've never seen that word mendacious before. I gotta go look it up. I don't know what it means. And Marquis Selassie Rabe, do you have my email? You wrote something the other day I wanted to ask you about. Hey, it's the Neteru. They work in powers, baby. But that source that you talked about at the end, me and Robon, we are very familiar with that. And hold on, let me call Reggie on the phone real quick. My email is ask brother Garfield. Are you finished, Reggie? Yes. Oh, okay. All right. So let me end the show then. All right. All right, my brother. Finished. What happened? Oh, you got cut off. Oh, what part did I get cut off at? Right as you was reading the thing, the reading the source for Seku and talking about raw bond. I mean, yeah. Oh, okay. So I'm cut off. Let me see if I can get back in. All right. Cool. All right. No problem. All right. Oh, don't end the show. Don't. Oh, all right. Wait. All right. So he probably was talking to himself the whole time, right? Oh man. Black Lion said it was historical Jesus. Yep, it possibly was. Yeah, Marquise, email me. I gotta ask you something you said the other day. For I wanna follow up on something that you said and regarding Asar. Ask Brother Garfield at gmail.com. And for anybody who would like to do a presentation on my channel, just email me and tell me a date. And everything that's being said, of course, is you. It's not me. So, it is what it is. All right, go ahead, Reggie. You can share your screen and carry on.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Share screen. Okay. Um, okay, so I'm going to end with this, and we'll talk a little bit maybe about it. But I don't want to keep the show too long, so I just want to show you some information. Okay, so all right, okay, so uh, Diop's last part of his life, he died in 1986, somewhere in February, March, something like that. I was on a trip, planning a trip to go to West Africa to see Dr. Diop with Dr. Clark and Dr. Jeffries. And he died a few months before we could ever get to see him. And so I know the period. But in 86, I think this book was published, 85, 86, from UNESCO, Libya Antique. And I'm going to do two things. So they have scholars reassessed Libya, right? and um, and I just want to give you the table of contents, and I want to show you some things. So is this the table of contents? Did I pass it? Yeah. What is this? Okay. So this is the table of contents. Uh, Libco Berber relationships with ancient Egypt, language and migrations of the early Saharan cattle herders, the formation of the Berber branch, right? Um, Burial customs, prehistoric rock in the Libya Sahara, Libyan nationalists, Semitic migrations to Libya and North Africa, right? Um, what else we have? Um, Possible contacts with the Central Nile Valley, with the Central Valley and Nile Valley and the River Niger by the scholar that I just read, Bubugado. Society in Lake Chad area of the Byzantine period, and somewhere over here is check on Diop's paper. I don't see it right now, but he is there. Yeah, formation of the Berber branch Sheikh Anta Diop. So Sheikh Anta Diop, as a scholar, as a researcher, stayed on the bus, kept driving. Other passengers got on. Some groups of people got off on the first stop and thought they had something. And now, years after Sheikh Anta Diop's passing, is putting forward something and now attributing old information to Sheikh Anta Diop that had since passed. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, I don't know if it's Tmhw that I want to search for. I'm going to give you, um, if you download this book, Tmhw, see see if it's Tamu Chinim. It's not okay. So Tamu, okay. So they want to say Tmhw. So let me just type Tmhw. So they mention Tamu once, but then they spell it out for the editor spells it out the rest of the book. So let's just see this. Tmhw. Tmhw. That's the way they spell it. Tmhw. Okay. So yeah. Let's just see this. Okay. Okay. So, Egyptian sources, Tmhw is a language. Wait. It says, in addition, it's possible to determine the language of the C group people, and this language of the Tamil is a language related to present day Berber. This statement rests on the following evidence: roughly 500 years of arrival of the Tamehu, six group people, a new ethnic group moved into the Nile Valley, occupying the same territories as the C group and forming a new ethnically mixed population. Okay, let's see what else. Uh, okay, great. Uh, um, okay, okay. Some Egyptian stories. It says Ahagar region. Okay, uh, meaning hound and slug. Since the dog certainly did not come from the Ahagar region, and since Tmhw was cut off from any contact with the Tmhw of the northern western delta border, he battled all of his life against the Heraclean rulers of Lower Egypt for the northern Tmhw. See below. The plausible explanation is that the dog and the name were part of a gift or tribute from the south from the Berber-speaking Tamehu or She group people of this day. So we know in ancient Egyptian lore, you could call the Magi for this, right? The Nubians were trainers of dogs. So the people in the south had dogs. Let's see what else it says. Um, okay, so um, Ramos was sent out to recruit laborers of the construction of the local temple among the Tmhw. Uh, Quick point: they were incorporated into African society. Okay. And of course, the New Kingdom Egyptian sources demonstrate a great familiarity with the Tmhw living in the north, adjacent to the delta, and list besides the general appellation Tmhw the names of single tribes or tribal confederations, Libel, Ribel, and Medwesh, among others. The titles of the chiefs of these tribes found in Egyptian inscriptions reveal that the language that they spoke, they are either called Wer or Mis of the Libel or Medwesh. The first, okay, so you can read it for yourself. I'm just going through some of the sources in here as people have gotten back on the bus, right? And it says the crown prince is reported to have taken all the cattle of the Tmhw. If you're Egypt centric, that's good for you. They took the cattle of the Tmhw, but these are other African people. Of course, the New Kingdom Egyptian sources demonstrate a greater familiarity with the Tmhw living in the north, adjacent to the Delta, and list besides the general appellation, the Tmhw, the names of single. Okay, so I read that. Sorry. Okay, let's go. Representation of the northern Tmhw found an example in the tomb Seti. We know about that. Shows that the Libu or Midwest generally had beards which are unknown to Egyptians, which are easily cleaner shaven or prefer a small mustache. So this doesn't mean that the Egyptians could not grow beards. That's just their custom. Okay. Doesn't mean that. Okay. So in a view long held among Egyptologists that the southern Tamehu of the Herchef reports, or Herkuf, and the northern Tmhw of the Middle Kingdom were identical people. Let me read that again. In a long view held among Egyptologists that the southern Tamehu of Herkuf reports and the northern Tmhw of the early Middle Kingdom were identical people. That either some of the southerns migrated north, sources, or some of the northerners moved south. The following, however, cast doubt on doubt on the validity of that idea. All right. So Egyptologists they're in the terminal and they're sending out buses and they're making arguments. Nothing wrong with that, right? We debate amongst our own, right? To assume a northward Tmhw migration without cattle does not make sense either. So they're postulating on Tmhw migrations, but they're African people migrating. That's the point. These are African people, an African civilization, probably the fourth most important African civilization. They are migrating. So I can continue. Let's just go on. I can continue. Okay. So other conversations and arguments and thoughts about the Tmhw. And I'm almost finished, and I'm gonna stop. Okay. So let's just. Okay, northern and southern Tmhw are culturally not quite identical, right? The C group Tmhw living in the Nile Valley were called Nehesi. Worse, the C group people, Tmhw living in the Nile Valley, were called the Nehesi by the Egyptians and were often recruited as mercenaries. The Nehesi are the Nubians. Representation of the mercenaries show the characters dressed as a single shoulder strap attached to a high waistband, right? And then and a single should not be confused with the cross shoulder straps of the Tmhw. The northern Tmhw are characterized by cloaks, penis sheaves, etc. So they're saying here that the Tmhw people, who were probably part of the Tmhw people in the north, right, were the people that was featured in some of the things that we get the issue of them being light skin or lighter, right? But the other groups of people living in the South are the Nehesi. So the last thing I want to show is Smash Rock Well, and I will quit. So let's see if I could, if you could hear this from Smash Rockwell. Okay, so let's play this. Northern lands on both sides entire in the stronghold. So he went in the entire southward to Elephantine, northward to Aphroditopolis, whatever, and in the northern lands on both sides entire in the stronghold. And look, and in the midst of the strongholds, that means the mighty, basically. Among the Aret, now this is a translation. Among the Fet Negroes, the Mazo Negroes, the Yam Negroes, and the Wawet Negroes. So really, this word Negroes here is actually not a word they used, right? If we go back and look at the text, it was the word I was showing us, this
black underlying word that they say is Negroes. What does this translate to? Underlying word. Nahes. That they say are the people of Tmhw. So they're showing us different groups of Nahes down here. Now, just from my reading, this says that we have an M, we have the DJA, we have another M, and then we have a land. Now I'm going to say Majam, right? And so when I go look back at the translations for the First Nation, they said a different name. Oh, but I do look. It says so. Maybe I got to figure that out. Oh, I know what's happening here. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups of Nahes. But what's happening is I only have 1, 2, 3, 4 groups of Nahes. So that means on page 99 of Bugs, because this is page 100, it means on page 99 of his book there was one more group of Nahes, but when I was writing this article, what I'm speaking of now was not actually relevant. So I didn't show that other group of Nahes. And so they would have been the ones they called the Itru. They called the Earthet Negroes, right? Because this makes sense now. Because it says, huh? Which book of buds? Oh, so the cold part. Let me see if I put it at the bottom of the article. It just says the inscription of Unes Budge, but I don't know if I actually put. Yeah, I should. It should be on here. I put the sources. So where is the inscription of Unes Budge? It should just be a link straight through it.
Well, I want to stop.
So as many people
wait.
know, you are not going to find this type of content, this type of work on any of those other channels, except for the channels that we are part of, that we go to teach. You're not gonna, but you're gonna, but there, these other people are gonna say this is spiritual. So does that say M Yam? So yeah, we about to go get in there. So that's why we about to get in it. Because look, this is saying the Mijah, the Magi. If you ask me, and the reason why I know is when I look at the inscription, it's so I left off the Earthet Negroes, supposedly. And so secondly, we have what they call Mazo Negroes. But if you take the word Mazo and copy that, and all you got to do is put it into Google is going to tell you that that's the Magi. Mazo, I put Mazo, and now let me come down here and look what pops up first. You see? Magi, Mijah. And so it says Mijah, Mazoi. This is a way that Europeans wrote it at one point in time.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop. So basically, what Smash did was Smash found that inscription of Una, right? And it's say this, and the people of Tmhw, or the Tamehu, and they are grouped with the Nahisi, and they all have feathers on their head, right? We like feathers. We like feathers on our head, right? Right, family. But the Nahisi, right, have feathers on their head, and they're Nubians, and they're talking about the different groups of Nubians or Nahese. Well, I say Negroes. I'm gonna say Negroes because the Europeans called them Negroes, and we say thank you. So now you can't take it back. So the Negroes are the Tame, right? The Magi, right? The and some of the other groups, right? But these are the groups, and they're talking about Wawet. So we know right here where they're talking about Wawet, right? Kau is another region, and then they're talking about over here the Tamu, right? And so they're all Nehesi. So there's something wrong. So let me just stop sharing my screen. I think I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I just want to ask you: is there something wrong? Okay, so I'm finished, Brother Garfield. Basically, I could go through sources from another book because I have much more sources, but I don't I think I've done enough.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, my brother. I want to say I appreciate you coming on. I'm actually going to rewatch everything right now and then get my notepad out. And I want to say everybody who tuned in, I want to say thank you. Share the show, like the show. If we got 160, 150 people watching, share the show with 10 people. That's all you got to do. And those 10 people share with somebody else.
Yeah.
All right.
And please, I mean, listen, I'm an independent researcher. If my information helps you, helps solve some problems for you, shows you that you have to check everybody's source and you can't, and it's freed your African mind, donate to Brother Reggie.
Hey, Reggie, let me tell you a quick story. I was in the plaza at 233rd in Baychester today, and I was in a store.
Yes.
And I was there with one of my friends, and she was buying something in the store, and this brother walked up and said, "Yo, you Brother Garfield." It was funny because he's like, "Yo, I recognize your voice."
Hey, man,
It was funny. Shout out to that brother, man. Whenever he's listening.
Hey, listen, I was in BJ and Costco in New Rochelle, and I was there with my sister, and I ran into a Hebrew, and in front of my sister, they said, you're gonna get put to death. And I said, huh? He said, yeah, Yah is gonna put you to death. I said, okay, so that's between me and Yah. And yeah, and I was
a Nuwapian told me he's gonna pray to best to kill me.
He's to kill you, right?
To kill me, yeah. He's gonna pray the best. This is like 6-7 years ago when I used to go in on the Nuwapians. But ladies and gentlemen, you know what? I don't want to stretch out this presentation. I want to keep it as it is, 1 hour 20 minutes. Y'all check it out.
You think it was helpful, Garfield? You think it was helpful to the people?
Definitely helpful. And we're gonna definitely deal with it. We're gonna deal with it, and we're gonna be teaching. Wow. I'm telling y'all, man, this debate, when it happens, it's gonna put a lot of things to rest, and all these dominoes are gonna drop one by one by one. I got the biggest Egyptomaniac helping me in my chat, Black Lion Supreme. I got the biggest.
hey, listen.
He plays Jabari in my back chat. He plays like so he plays the Jabari role, and he said, well, Jabari's going to say this. And so he's the one that's preparing me for the debate. So that's what he does. He got to keep me strong.
So the debate can't be canceled again because of Brother Reggie.
Reggie. No. You ain't saying nothing disrespectful, man. You're good, man. You're doing a good job. You see, the people love you. That's why if they love you now, they're going to donate to your Cash App, Reginald Maybury. All right? And we're going to do what we're going to do.
And I want the people who come to the debate, when the dude says Tmhw, you say pseudo. Mm-hmm. He says Tamehu, you say pseudo. Right? So all right, he says December 25th, you say pseudo, right? He says
Denisha likes it, man. It's a great shout out to Denisha, man. She's been supporting Brother Garfield and a lot of people. Soul. We love you, sis. Thank you for the support. And I'm gonna ask everybody who watches the show, share it with 10 people. It's not that long. Just say, you know what? Yeah. And we're gonna start doing the show shorter and shorter. So we gonna build our platform. We're getting 3,000 views every show, 4,000 views. As long as we stay right there, that means we're growing and we're growing. All right. So we're gonna grow. We are baby Sonetta right now. Shout out to Sonetta, by the way, with his miserable self. Shout out to Sonetta. He probably watching. Shout out to Sonetta, man. Without Sonetta,
but here we check information. Sonetta puts up a lot of information that we can check, like Dr. Walter Williams, and I'm a trader. And
he got Alim Bey. Matter of fact, tune into Sonetta. He's gonna have Alim Bey in a few minutes. So if y'all into Alim Bey, you're gonna see him in a few minutes.
And listen, if you're on a bus with a driver, ask him what his final destination is. Don't be like these people and get off the first stop and start yapping stuff without following the definite.
Reggie is nuts, yo. I swear.
Marcus helped me with that. All right, peace and Black Power.
Peace and love, family. We out of here.
Thank you. Peace and love.
Thank you again, Brother Reggie.